Welcome to the series Person of Interest, brought to you by the Australian Investigation Agency, fighting for truth, accountability and justice. Hello, my name is John Armfield. What you're about to see is how one false document, created after I asked 6 questions the Australian Defence Force did not want to answer. This became the story Defence used to destroy my career. They had motive, they had opportunity, they had method, and the impact was catastrophic. This is the cover story. Episode 6, How a False Timeline Destroyed a Clearance Diver's Career. Section 1, Who is Flight Lieutenant Mills? Flight Lieutenant Carly Mills joined the Royal Australian Air Force in 2011. At the time, she had less than 10 years service. No operational deployments, no experience handling trauma, complex welfare, or high-pressure crisis leadership. Yet Defence Force recruiting placed her in charge of a team of senior Army, Navy, and Air Force personnel, the majority with multiple operational deployments in complex environments and war zones. The mismatch was immediate, and the consequences were catastrophic. Section 2, the 6 questions. I received the inquiry officer's report into my brother's death from the Helensvale Post Office in August 2021. The first time in my career such important documentation did not come through the chain of command.
About 2 years ago, we're talking about yourself at this stage, you were presented with a report.
Yes.
So an investigation report. The way that was presented to you, I also apologise. That was very poor. That just reflects poorly on the organisation. That something of such a sensitive matter that could be interpreted many different ways is not given to a member with significant support services there, i.e. a doctor to take you through the medical stuff, because it's a pretty medical heavy report, or a lawyer to take you through the legal stuff. So I do apologise about that.
The same report which the Chief of Defence Force described as a horrible, horrible report. The same document that no ADF officer would explain until the 5th of May 2023.
It's 2 years I've waited.
I know.
In the back of my head I've got...
I read this and I was like, I don't understand why this has taken 2 years. I do understand that there's like billion email chains about we need to find these, we need to actually make sure there was an investigation. That took a bit of time to do that. So let's say 6 months to do that, because some of these reports, which were medical and confidence, weren't in medical files or in different places, but they found it eventually. So I'll give them 6 months. I won't give them 2 years.
With no welfare, no support, and no chain of command present, my psychologist would later order immediate stress leave. This was the first time in my military career. I went directly to my command to explain. After reading the email from the medical professionals regarding stress leave, Mills brushed me off. She shut her door and she refused to speak to me. Senior witnesses would later confirm this. The Royal Commission began to fill the void of leadership and compassion that I expected from the ADF I had loyally served. With their support, legally and medically, I decided to take a stand and I drafted the 6 questions. Questions that exposed the senior medical officer's failure to form mandatory risk management teams, Defence Instruction General Personnel 16 TAC 26 breaches, systemic failures in my brother's care, a decade-long failure to inform my family, leadership failures from 2011 to 2023, and the moral injury of advising my brother to join the ADF. These questions did not just challenge Defence Force recruiting, they challenged the entire defence narrative. This created motive. Section 3, motive emerges. My 6 questions exposed major failures and created real risk for Defence Force recruiting leadership, the medical chain, the welfare chain, the administrative chain, Navy headquarters, ADF headquarters, and Defence's position before the current and ongoing Royal Commission into Defence and Veterans Suicide. When a subordinate asks questions that can trigger vicarious liability, reputational damage, and scrutiny from the National Royal Commission, the system has motive to protect itself. Section 4, Opportunity, the Freeman email. On the 14th of January 2022, Deputy Director Military Recruiting, Lieutenant Colonel Matthew Freeman, sent Mills an email. He attached the Chief Defence Force decision brief, the Noonan Welfare Directive from 23 July 2021, and the chain of command email surrounding the inquiry officer's inquiry report released to myself. And Freeman asked Mills, Carly, cast your mind back to when the attached email from July was sent through from Captain Jan Noonan to yourself. What actually transpired that saw P.O. Armfield travel to Australia Post to collect our registered mail and see him read it in the car? If you can provide a rundown of the timeline and what actions occurred from the chain of command and what the members' actions and approach to accepting chain of command welfare support were at this time. This will assist in answering the request for information from Captain Ian Andrews. This was not fact-finding. This was narrative construction. And Freeman wasn't asking a neutral witness. He asked the officer at the centre of my complaint to reconstruct the events in a way that would flow up the chain to Captain Ian Andrews, Director of Navy Incident Management. This was the opportunity. It set the stage for method. Section 5, Method, the false timeline. Only 4 days later, on the 18th of January 2022, Mills produced the timeline Freeman requested. It was not a contemporaneous record. It did not reflect what actually happened. Instead, the timeline blamed me, portrayed me as unstable, suggested I rejected welfare, presented a fictional mental health decline, which Mills was not qualified to do, omitted critical facts, concealed Mills' own failures, and aligned perfectly with the narrative Freeman's email had asked her to create. Let me show you exactly how she did it. Example 1. Weaponizing stress that Mills created. In her timeline, Mills wrote, 27th of October 2021. P.O. Armfield very animated around discussions on the threat of China and the COVID vaccinations, concerning to the chain of command. She painted this as instability. But here's the context. 9 days earlier, Mills had emailed all staff. Any unvaccinated member will have a record of conversation. Unvaccinated members cannot perform their job. Members may be posted out and replaced with vaccinated volunteers. Mills created a coercive, threatening, high-stress environment. Then she used reactions to the pressure she created as evidence of instability. This is textbook narrative manipulation from a junior leader with half the service time that most of her staff had. Mills provoked stress, observed stress, pathologized stress, but again, not qualified to diagnose mental health. This is not leadership. This is retrospective justification. creating a misleading record to excuse failures and shift blame. Example 2. Distorting operational expertise into instability. Mills wrote that my behaviour discussing China was concerning, yet she never addressed me with that. But here's what she left out. On that day, 2 colleagues sent me articles about Taiwan deploying US Mark 6 buoyant sea mines. Also an article about B-52s configured to lay DST sea mines in Taiwan. I was one of the few Navy clearance divers that directed his career to specialise in this area. In 2020, the year prior, I was a senior instructor in maritime EOD, sea mines, and I taught the Navy officers and the Navy Clearance Diving Advanced course how to render those exact mines safe. In 2014, I duxed my advanced course because this was my specialist field. This was not instability. This was professional expertise. Exactly what Defence pays clearance divers to understand. Example 3. Misrepresenting the town hall meeting. On the 5th of May 2021, Mills led a town hall meeting regarding the protesters that were harassing Defence Force recruiting staff, including leaving notes on female ADF staff cars, a clear workplace health and safety threat. Staff raised legitimate safety concerns. In her timeline, Mills claims, I acknowledged PO Armfield's concerns and attempted to diffuse escalation. But Mills admitted in other correspondence to the ADF that she became overwhelmed, admitted she did not know what to do, that she did not know the law, that she became emotional, she cried, and she shut the meeting down. The flight sergeant stated the mood shifted. She became emotional. She shut the conversation down. None of that appears in her timeline. Leaving it out protects her and frames me as the problem. Example 4. The lies about triggers. Commander Southwood claims in an email sent to senior leadership that Mills claimed I was triggered at a female recruiting event in March 2021. A provably false statement. I never attended the event. It was females only. If I was triggered, where was the support? Mills states in her timeline, in discussions with the warrant officer, P.O. Armfield mentions that he is meeting with a psychologist on a regular basis that is helping him address issues of concern. This states that she was not aware I was receiving support until September 2021. But she identifies I'm triggered in March. Example 5. The mental health fabrication. Mills attempted to create a pattern of mental decline, something the psychologist, general practitioner, flight sergeant, area manager, and my entire service record contradict. This narrative only appears after I raise my 6 questions. It's not in the workplace capacity report 6 weeks prior. Every example fits the same pattern. Retrospective justification, backfilling the record, constructing a misleading narrative. The contradictions. Mills' timeline contradicts every independent source. The Workplace Capacity Report in November 2021, 6 weeks prior to the timeline, describes me as one of the most capable and supportive members. The Flight Sergeant's statement, my psychologist, the GP, Noonan's Welfare Directive, the Chain of Command emails, and my sworn Royal Commission testimony. Finally, the DFR Area Manager states, I would just like to conclude by saying the following. I've been the Area Manager of DFR Gold Coast for over 5 years. I have worked with many ADF members in my time at DFR and have worked with 5 different career promotion team leaders, my job. I can say without any hesitation that P.O. Armfield is by far the most passionate, effective, and professional career promotion team leader that I have ever had the pleasure of working with. John regularly went above to achieve great outcomes for Gold Coast and the ADF as a whole. His desire to reach more people and share his passion for the ADF was palpable. I know that he worked additional hours and stuck his neck out, contacting high-ranking Navy officers to achieve his mission. I always found John to be polite, professional, passionate, and very effective at his job. P.O. Armfield was an integral member of the Gold Coast DFR team, and he will be sorely missed. This is method. A constructed narrative created after I complained. Exactly what experts describe as backfilling the record. This sequence suggests the timeline was created not as a contemporaneous record, but as a retrospective justification requested by Lieutenant Colonel Freeman to respond to a request of information and to protect himself and DFR from scrutiny. It contradicts multiple independent statements and appears to constitute a misleading official record. 4 days before creating the timeline, Mills emailed Freeman stating, "I refute any brushing off of the member and his welfare considerations pertaining to me." But the flight sergeant, whose statement states, where Flight Lieutenant Carly Mills has said she didn't brush you off, what I witnessed couldn't be characterised any other way. My Royal Commission testimony under oath, where the Commonwealth declined to question those statements, clearly discusses this issue. The evidence confirms she did brush me off, refused to speak to me, and walked away. This denial is not a mistake. Fraud is defined in the Defence Fraud and Corruption Plan 2022 as providing false or misleading information and or documents to the Commonwealth, failing to provide information when an obligation exists. Example, Captain Anne Andrews admits she was not provided statements from my superiors that support my allegations. She was only provided one side of the narrative. Also, making or using forged or falsified documents. The release or use of misleading information for the purpose of deceiving, misleading, or to hide wrongdoing. Does my investigation not meet all those definitions of fraud? This is part of the cover story. Section 6, the welfare failure they needed to fix. On the 23rd of July 2021, Captain Jan Noonan emailed Mills directly. Ensure sufficient welfare measures are in place for PO John Armfield. This order was clear. Mills acknowledged it, but she did not enact it. Noonan had also been provided her with the decision brief for CDF, request to release a copy of the inquiry officer's written inquiry report into my brother's death. Mills and the entire chain of command, up to the Chief Defence Force, knew I had a brother, knew he served, knew of his suicide attempts and his suicide. They knew that I was pursuing justice, that I had expressed concerns with the psychological support management of my brother, and they knew that I knew the Edinburgh Health Centre was allegedly experiencing critical manning shortages at the time of my brother's death, which may have affected compliance with defence policy. Everyone knew. Mills, Freeman, Noonan, Andrews, Deputy Chief of Navy, Chief of Air Force, and the Chief of Defence Force. When I needed support most, she closed her door and walked away. But they all did. The timeline was needed to reverse the truth. Support failed. The timeline says support was offered, but I refused. That's false. Section 7 Inspector General ADF takes the bait. Inspector General ADF in 2022 acknowledged that regarding the Defence Force fact find, no parties were interviewed. Desktop assessment only. There was reliance on Defence Force recruiting's contemporaneous notes. Perception of bias is reasonable. They also state that the fact find offer exceeded the terms of reference by referencing my mental health, and that the fact find officer's service record show they were not qualified to conduct a fact find. Imagine me supervising a diving, demolitions, weapons, or explosive ordnance training or mission unqualified. More of that in episode 8. Inspector General ADF would later change these findings, accepting the timeline was not fraudulent, the timeline was not defamatory, support was offered, I disengaged, Mills wasn't negligent, and the chain of command was unaware of the situation. All based on Mills's false timeline and Freeman's selective reconstruction. Not evidence, not witness statements. None of my subordinates have ever been questioned. Not welfare directives, not Royal Commission testimony. Not the previous Inspector General ADF investigation in 2022. And most importantly, not the recording from medical and legal experts representing the ADF in 2023. The false narrative became official. Section 8. The cover-up. I reported the false timeline to CO HMAS Morton, Warrant Officer of the Navy, Director, Navy Past Workforce and Incident Management, Captain Ian Andrews, Deputy Chief of Navy, the Chief of Navy, the Royal Commission, Inspector General ADF in matters 8, 11 and 12. I hand-delivered the statements to Captain Andrews in Canberra. I then emailed her again from the airport to create a chain of custody. I knew I needed that evidence. Every senior officer knew the timeline was discredited, disproven, contradicted, and harmful. Yet no one corrected the record. No one offered me support, let alone truth, accountability, or justice. I was now the problem, because correcting it would expose welfare failure, leadership failure, procedural breaches, misrepresentation, and systemic negligence during a Royal Commission. This is not misconduct. This is institutional self-protection. And here's the part that matters most. I gave evidence about this entire situation under oath at the Royal Commission into Defence and Veteran Suicide. That testimony carries the highest legal weight available in Australia. It was sworn, recorded, transcribed, and Defence had every opportunity to challenge it. They did not. My account has a legal presumption of honesty because it was sworn, it was examined, the Commission accepted it, Defence did not dispute it, and the documentary evidence supports it, and it's all available online. Defence cannot simply write it off with a draft Inspector General ADF finding. A sworn version holds greater legal authority. And my account wasn't just sworn, it was corroborated and the trail documented. Mills's denial, by contrast, was unsworn, contradicted, and provided only in an internal email to the officer responsible for managing the fallout. So when Mills wrote, for example, I refute any brushing off of the member, she wasn't just contradicting me. She was contradicting sworn evidence accepted by a Royal Commission and multiple independent witnesses. In any legal or administrative setting, that matters. Her notes were not contemporaneous. Any administrative narrative that contradicts sworn evidence is suspect. And remember, the night before I gave evidence to the Commonwealth fought to have the names, ranks and positions retracted from my evidence at a Royal Commission. The Royal Commission ceded names, but not ranks or position, and history and the evidence outlines these matters. Section 9, motive, opportunity, method, impact, cover-up. Let's call it what it is. You have motive, my 6 questions threatened the system. Opportunity, Freeman asked Mills to reconstruct events. Method, Mills's false timeline. Impact, Inspector General ADF misled, my career destroyed. Cover-up, multiple senior officers informed, none corrected the record. Systemic failure, the institution protected itself, not a sailor. This was not an error, it was a cover story. Australia, do you know why I never confronted Flight Lieutenant Carly Mills about the timeline? The timeline that my investigation identified was forwarded throughout the ADF and emailed 11 times to 14 addressees. This timeline borders on defamation of my personal and professional character due to the wide dissemination and the direct impact that it has had on my reputation and then the treatment and discharge from the Australian Defence Force. The timeline paints me as having psychological injuries. Please remember, I posted into Defence Force recruiting a fit to dive and deploy clearance diver, one of the highest medical classifications in the ADF. I was never afforded a right of reply to the timeline that was written about me. But why? Because I was never expected to learn that the timeline existed. How is that adhering to the service values of service, courage, respect, integrity, and excellence? In 2022, I requested a freedom of information on all information pertaining to my communication with Flight Lieutenant Mills. Some pages were fully redacted, so I requested a review of my freedom of information request on the 13th of September 2022. It was only after my review that I was made aware of the timeline. The ADF were never going to provide it. Australia, have you identified yet? I was never meant to know that this document existed. That's why the ADF conducts such correspondence, because the majority of the time they are not caught. They are acting behind the scenes. So much for service values. More on freedom of information in future episodes. This story isn't just about one officer. It's about how the system let a false narrative climb the chain of command, even when every independent source proved it wrong, even when the evidence was right in front of them. So Australia, I've provided my evidence. You've seen my truth. Do you believe my perception and investigation is correct? Do you believe this was a systemic failure, or as the Royal Commission stated, intentional and malicious stonewalling? Why has senior leadership not acted? I'm still confused. Were they protecting the officers? Were they protecting the reputation of the organisation? Or were the officers just following orders from above and therefore protecting themselves? Do you think the current ADF is an organisation you would want your family to serve in? I loved my job. Episode 7, we'll discuss Commander Fiona Southwood, the officer who heard the truth, looked away, and tried to have me charged. This will blow your mind. Thank you, Australia, for watching. Thank you, Australia, for your support.